over to you and take it away, Andy.
Hey, thank you, Sarah. That was a lovely introduction. I've never had such an ego stroke ahead of a speech as that. So it's good that Sarah set out her mission to find the world's greatest innovator to talk to you today, but they weren't available. So you've unfortunately got me. But what I'll do, I think it's best if the last thing we want in a year of looking down a Zoom lens is watch my mug for an hour. So what I'll do, I'll talk pretty quickly around some of the principles that I think engender ability, and then we'll jump into some photos, because there, in sharing some photos, can be
great stuff.
Guys, want.
Oh, Andy's frozen. Oh no. Oh, typical kind of way about this, isn't it?
Serves him right, to be honest. It's his ego's got the better of him.
Oh no, I inflated it too much, and now he's kind of fucked. You're
so
back.
What happened? Did everybody go, oh, we can't stand him? And it's like 20 seconds in, we've gone like, he's out, he's rubbish.
We said your ego was too inflated, that there's no room for anything else, Andy.
That was amazing. I don't know how long I spoke before I realised that no one was listening to me. Right, lovely. Where did I get to? Right.
Let's try that again. Take two.
Yes, take two. Right. Let's jump into it. So grab a piece of paper. Now I'll try and make this interactive. And your notes for the session, I want you to do what I'm doing now. You can just draw round your hand like that, because I'm going to share with you 5 principles to engender a innovation capability in your business. And it's on those 5 things you can remember the stories and the tactics. And I think if you've got a metaphor as a hand, it's going to be much easier for you to remember things. Okay. Oh, Angus is on. I like the microphone on. Great stuff. So the analogy is, if you've got that hand with you, it's going to act like a tool to get stuff done, to power your innovation machine. And if you mismanage these 5 principles, or you don't invest in them, your sort of innovation agenda is going to run around and annoy people, a bit like that green hand on the Addams Family called The Thing. It sort of walks around the corridors and irritates. All right. So I'll rattle through these 5 things, and then we'll jump into the photos. Okay. So on my big laser display center behind me, here's your hand, right? The first thing I think great businesses with innovation capability have is that they've invested in doing all they can to help shift people's mental attitude and mindset. And it's hard, as Sarah will know, as a psychologist, to shift people's attitude. It's quite a difficult thing to do, but it is easier to nudge their behavior. And over a period of time, if you change people's behaviors and get them into new habits, you can then put language to describe that behavior. And over a period of time, they'll imbue a different mindset, because the first thing that will uncouple a set of capability or creativity in your business will be people's belief around whether they can or can't. And I remember some college poster on the wall back in the day that said, if you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're probably right. So the first thing we invest in, and certainly the stories that we've gathered from our clients, is that there is always a healthy attitude and mindset with people who are working in creativity innovations. That's the number 1 thing to invest in. Second thing, okay, will be the skills. All right, the skills. And by skills, I mean the art of facilitating the conversation around innovation. It's very rare that on graduate recruitment programs or in universities, or even maybe the first few years in a job, that you get exposed to the tools and skills and language in order to scope a brief, craft insight, navigate that murky world between a thought and an idea, or even manage other people's reactions when it comes to new thinking. But these are skills. These are teachable, bite-sizable, templatable, transferable skills. And you guys in L&D will know the importance of informal learning and blending all of that over a period of time. So I'm a huge fan of investing deeply people's ability to innovate in order for them to make new and creative connections. Okay. The third thing I'll talk about will be obviously the world's biggest topic, which is leadership. That in and of itself is an entire career, but by here the context of leaders getting involved in the innovation charge and actually showing up and being physically present rather than being some distant brain in a jar that says no all the time because we tried it before in 1988 and it didn't work. All right, so again, we can start to imbue a kind of culture of innovation by involving the leaders. The fourth one, something that we're all pretty familiar with at the moment, which is our changing environment. And it's all about changing the environment, not about having a specific innovation environment. If you're still thinking, oh, let's invest in the innovation room, then please come out of 1992 and join the real world. There's far better things you can do with your time, money, and expertise here. So we'll talk about the power the environment has on you. And then lastly, the fifth principle, the behaviours. Behaviours, how people show up and present themselves as they journey through an innovation process. Okay, so those are the principles, and I can expand on those in questions later. But we'll do the questions later, because I think if I jump into the photos, it sets a bit of context, and leave it all to the end. Or if I were to paraphrase Daniel Webster in 1850, I prefer to let it all snow to end before sweeping the path. There you go. That's the posh quote for the day. Right, Sarah, I'm going to drive. I'm going to give this a go and see if I can't disconnect myself from the call once again and jump into some photos. Okay, so if I share screen, let's get the slideshow up rather than my tax return. Here we go. So there we go. There's our world. Let's jump in straight away. Let me tell you a story first about what I think innovation looks like when it's powered up in a business. And with all of my stories, I'm going to tell stories about people, because people remember stories about people, not process. And I'll try my best to disguise identities as best I can. But actually, in all fairness, it's better that you hear about the company, because talking about a large financial organization doesn't have the same power and magic as if I mentioned Barclays or HSBC, as Sarah alluded to, because it comes with a bit of context. But it's our secret. So if you can hide the stories if you're going to share them outside of this room, but go for the principles behind them. All right. So here's oops, press the wrong button, Andy. Here we go. Please work. Yeah, there we go. So here's Jenny. So Jenny worked at HSBC at the time of this photo. She was a marketeer and she was given the brief by her boss of marketing loans. And in her part of the world, which is the Philippines, the last thing you want to be doing is marketing loans, because the received wisdom back in the day was that being in debt and certainly owning money to a large organization is a bad thing. Sort of society and culturally, it's not good to have a loan. All right. So when she was given this brief, she needed to think differently and more innovatively about it. But because she'd gone and invested in attitude, skills, leadership, environment, and behavior, she did things differently. So instead of staring at a PowerPoint screen, it became a team sport, handwritten insight decks rather than pages and pages of PowerPoints and data. And her insight was that in the Philippines, saving for the future wasn't about cash. It was about spending money on the next generation. And families, which are huge in Philippines, would be all the time showing their love by spending time with each other and hanging out in shopping malls and eating and drinking and having fun. So that translated into a campaign like this. And for those of you who can't speak much Philippine, that translates as don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today by enjoying the benefits of an HSBC loan. And that imagery of a father and son enjoying some quality time together in the present was quite an innovation in terms of marketing for HSBC. And as a result, the consideration for that brand went up. And like when you read any graph, it's not the numbers that are important, it's the sort of the shape and the slope. So an uptick is a good thing. So it's a simple story that I used to explain what Jenny did, was that she did things differently and got into the habit of being a bit more physical and practical with things. I've got lots of other stories, but now I've just told that one, I can then jump into each of these aspects individually. Okay, so the first one was all about attitude, right? There is a team who immediately look like they've got the right attitude to go and make things happen. And often leaders will say, yes, it's important not to trample on ideas, and then immediately do that. And we call that out at the start in projects and say, if you're going to have a bad attitude, you're basically going to kill your ideas in the same way as you're going to shoot a puppy. And of course, they dismiss this unless we physically remind them with an image, and that usually gets the heartstrings going. So we invest in people's attitudes. And as I said, it's quite hard to shift the attitude, but you can shift people's behavior over a period of time. So when I worked in a bank, believe it or not, I was given the opportunity to shift behavior there. I gave them a challenge. This is in the Bank of Ireland in the UK. I put up a big poster here, 101 small challenges that people would do over 101 days to shift their behavior so they could get used to change, especially given the bank was going through a reorg and it was starting to adopt new agile processes and new ways of working. So challenge number one was very simple. Put your watch from one wrist to the other and spend a day with your watch on a different wrist. It would just break that habit of you looking at one wrist than the other. Challenge number two, sit in a different chair for the afternoon. Challenge number three was something like get off the tube one stop early and continue your commute to work by walking, in the hope that you would then start to be exposed to new material. So these challenges all added up over the 3 months, and by each challenge we would put quite explicitly the reasoning behind that challenge and why, if you were to give that behavior a go, it would start to shift your mental attitude over time. And what we reported was that people felt more comfortable in moments of ambiguity, more comfortable in change, more comfortable dealing with the unknown, because they had had successful adventures by adopting some of those challenges. And some of them involved building time capsules with their kids. Some of them involved, cooking for friends in a different way. These are human activities that are very simple to understand and adopt with a different ambition. Okay, so that was something that helped shift people's mindsets over time. So remember, you shift mindset by shifting the behavior first. Okay. Skills, right, here's another story. So this is Red Bull, and specifically this is a team over in Azerbaijan, and what they're doing there's 4 of them having an idea session for a locally relevant brand building event. And the idea that came out was based on the stimulus of the magic carpet. The legend of the flying magic carpet came from Azerbaijan. So the simple DNA of the idea was a downhill carpet race in a new ski resort. Helps if you've got an illustrator to capture the ideas, but essentially the sketch, it was all there. That idea then went to HQ, where the behaviours were still carried on, growing the idea and not killing it, because both Nina and Nino in the photo there had positive attitudes and successes around ideas. There's a whole bunch of tools that go with that, but the idea kicked off. There it is. There's a photo of it in action. It's been running ever since, and it's been very successful for Red Bull, building that brand over time. And as I said, sitting behind it, you'd expect to see the templates and the specific language and the tick lists to make sure that idea was commercially relevant. But the whole thing needs to be facilitated. And there's a myth that innovation is just this process that's going to happen as in the same way that Microsoft will sort of update itself overnight. And we're always very keen in the Genius Box to make sure that all of these elements are clear and present in any part of the innovation process. Visibility of the problem, that you've got the right equipment. And by equipment, I mean pen and paper is a start. We don't have to start throwing technology at the issue just yet. Growing one idea at a time is a skill. Being facilitating, navigating the difference between thoughts and ideas in a creative session is a skill, and making sure that stimulus is available. All of these are teachable techniques that you can build over time with the right investment. And in so doing, you build that lovely creative energy that is just natural in some businesses more so than the other. So once you've identified those components, you can start to invest and spot it in other teams. So here Ben is coaching the guys at Coke, of all places, who should know better on how to have ideas, but they didn't, in how to capture ideas. And there is a particular discipline we would always want to see in making sure that any idea, whether it be for a soft drink or an internal HR recruitment process is captured in a certain way. So you can get quite specific about that language. Tip is, for me, dead simple. Use big fat marker pens and coloured paper, because it stops people getting into the detail and it keeps things nice and clean. Because if you can't explain it in 30 seconds and you can't show it to someone on a piece of paper, it's going to get instantly very hard for people to connect to. So just keep it simple would be my advice. And then again, it doesn't matter whether you're in France talking pharmaceuticals, or Nairobi for a charity, or back in HSBC again, hired a space with a cat, you will see the same formula apply. Small groups, not big masses of not 20 or 30 people all shouting at a flip chart. One facilitator, one idea at a time. And if you can't get hold of a real cat, then draw one. Okay, let's march through. And then again, if it gets very complicated, a simple skill in facilitating ideas is standing. We all know the benefits of a stand-up meeting. I've had the pleasure of doing a meeting in the plank. Okay, you'll be surprised how quickly people make decisions when they're forced to be on their elbows. But again, if you've got these skills in your team, then you can navigate the hardest of conversations. So this photo was taken for, let's think, this is BP, and they are discussing there the internal ways of working for coming up with new sales pipelines for lubricants in East Germany. Okay, it's not the most exciting topic, but again, simple adoption of clarity of the brief, access to stimulus, and space being facilitated, we can march through and we're not going to be all sitting around laptops in a darkened room. Okay, let's just whiz through some more photos. Here we go. What was the next one? Leadership and the involvement of leaders, right? So this is getting your leaders involved in any innovation in gender is super important right from the start. So here's the board of Suntory Beverage, and Suntory Beverage are all about Yatta Minahare, which is Japanese about let's do it. Well, how about a call to arms one sunny morning as the sun came up, doing a bit of Chinese dancing here, get them energized. And it's a lovely way that we could see how up for it the leaders were. So the message about what they were saying matched the behaviors of what they were doing in the organization. Again, another leadership behavior that I saw work fabulously well. This is another Red Bull story. You'll see in the photo there's stimulus, images, marker pens, big fat simple ideas captured very elegantly, small groups. But what happened when the idea was pitched in a few moments, there's a gentleman on the left there in the grey shirt. He immediately as the leader got his phone out and sent an email around the whole business saying, tomorrow afternoon we're cancelling meetings, because what I want everybody to do is jump on this idea and work out how we can get it up and running by the end of the quarter. And I thought it was a magical moment, because his behavior then showed everybody else in the organization how important innovation was, because he was supporting it and endorsing it immediately. So again, if you can reduce in space and time leaders distance from innovation projects, you'll find that your uptick in what happens, I think, accelerates. Again, this is a subtle one, but I think grows over time. In certain situations, you've always got lots of lanyards and badges and suits and all of these sort of unconscious ways that we dress. They create barriers between leadership and innovation. And here, this is Marks and Spencer. I can't remember now who the most important person was in the room when that photo was taken. I know that there was a discussion happening. I know that there was a decision being made about some of the processes you can see on the floor. I assume it's the lady in the scarf who might be a leader, but it could have just been a creative participant, and somebody else in the room was the leader who had the responsibility to make the decision. But again, if you can reduce the number of physical signals that create leaders as they're perceived in organizations, then I think that's a good thing, in order that the creative process becomes the hero and the most important thing that gets discussed. Sarah, you'll recognize this. Look, there's a picture of Sarah when she was young in the left there. Okay, so that's HSBC. What we've done here in the leaders is we had the leaders present for the entire project. In this instance, I think it was Ryan who was quite a key decision maker. And he cleared his diary in order to be with the project team as much as he could that week. Again, it sends a positive signal about how much leadership is valued. having a bit of fun again, not forced fun, but this is Samsung, and they were all about how to get further faster as a group of leaders to accelerate decision making. And we re-expressed that brief as he needed to wrestle with the problem, because wrestlers don't spend a lot of time talking, they spend a lot of time doing. And here it was only fair that we put the leaders in wrestling masks just to reinforce that point. All right, so having a bit of fun and theatre with things is again a skill, and any opportunity to wear a wig to remind people about the genius in the business is everyone involved. Okay, so some stuff on leadership. Right, next one was environment, and this is not about having an innovation room. I remember being shown with aplomb the innovation room at Emirates Airlines, and it was this lovely shiny box with plasma screens and lush carpet and interactive setups. And then when I went there about 9 months later, all I could see was stacked chairs, and it's where they kept the photocopier paper. It's just died. And in truth, you don't have ideas in a room, you have ideas when you change environment. So this was my desk at a bank. We had a clear desk policy at the bank, and I kept my desk like that until they stopped sending me memos, because my argument was, well, I can't do my job and make new creative connections if I'm not stimulated all the time. And the environment affects you in two ways. You're either being exposed to new and different ideas from your competitors, or it physically and energetically changes your state. So let's make use of a constant changing environment all the time. So you might have an office that looks like that. It's quite hard for me personally to have ideas in the grey box. I'll just end up having grey ideas for you. And people will struggle, no matter how hard you try and run a creative session. Everyone's just going to get pinched behind these desks, and the laptops and the leads and the hum of the air conditioning and the awful artificial light is just going to play havoc with your senses. So mix things up is the advice, and don't have a favorite. Don't have the favorite coffee shop for where you have your one-to-one catch-ups, because you'll start to inherit a particular behavior associated with it, in the same way that my dad used to get grumpy when he sat in his favorite chair and watched the news. You've constantly got to get into a rhythm of doing things differently. So one of the first things you can do is clear space. Get rid of those tables. Space is so important, so people can connect physically with each other. There's a lot of science to show that at an energetic level, we can pick up on the energetic levels in our heartbeats when we're in a room, and a big Formica desk is just going to cut that energy in half. So we always create space. It's quite hard to hide when you're sitting on a chair, right? So create space. Space is important when you have to incubate your thinking as well. Here's an insight project where all of those pieces of paper on the floor are customer quotes, and in order to see the patterns in what customers are saying and join the dots, a bit like stars in a constellation, you need to see what's going on, and you can't see unless you've got space. Space and mess is obviously one of the things that go hand in hand. So don't get precious about your clean desk policies, or worse still, the innovation room that I went into once that said, please wipe off all material at the end of the day. Well, that's just sort of containing people's mindsets, isn't it, to a 9-to-5 thinking. We've ran sessions in igloos that are inflatable, that came into the corporate office and sort of inflated in the foyer. That created a nice energy. You can have this obviously on the floor. You can have a bit of theatre, and there's just certain smiles you can't fake. So when the space is working, you can start to make new and creative connections. Sarah, you're a hero again. Look, on the floor. I'm a fan of doing work on the floor, because the floor is a canvas. And for those of you that haven't got that have children, will know that your kids spend a lot of their time creating and building on the floor. You can get hands-on. It's an equalizer. All right, everybody has the same sort of parity of responsibility when they're on the floor, physically putting things down. You can create big 2x2s on the floor with a bit of colored tape, instead of trying to do this on think on a PowerPoint. The same tool there used in an even bigger space, more context. Okay, there's Kirsty over here in Japan, again doing something. I can't remember what that was all about, but it was all about making use of the floor. And again, it brings out that natural childlike appreciation of the world, not childish, but that kind of childlike association where you are likely to see things in new ways if you're down and dirty in the same way that kids play with bricks. Outside, again, super useful. It changes energy. So my Xanadu is the combination of both. So here we are at the top of a corporate office. This is a guy called Todd, and what we're doing there, we're scoping out the innovation brief there, working out at which level to operate on. And instead of crowded around an Excel sheet arguing the toss, or in a cooped up around a pad in a dimly lit internal office, we went to the roof and mapped it out physically on the floor. And we could walk up and down, discuss the benefits of what was going on, something that the environment outside allowed us to do. Okay. And then my ultimate place is, obviously being a Brit, is let's just go down the pub with your problem owner and over 1 pint challenge, tell me what the problem is so I can understand it. Okay. If you can't do that in a pint, it's not yet a full and healthy, happy brief. Right. Last but one, behaviours. Okay. So we've got, there we are, where's this? So this is Visa, this is over in Dubai. There is a team there with all the ingredients that I've mentioned. So the leaders are in the room, they're letting themselves down, there's a bit of informality, we're on the floor, we're making new connections, we're starting to make an association with our behaviour and what the consumers might be thinking. And I've yet to say that anybody has made solid connections at work. They're often on the route to work. Their behaviours are very different at work than they are when they're at home. Well, those lines have finally been blurred. And if the 15 months that we've just been suffering has taught us anything, it's that some of those inherited rules about how we behave at work can be broken successfully. So one of the things you can do, you can behave like the problem. So this is Seb and Sarah being an HR onboarding process. And Sarah had to work from left to right across those across the spreadsheet that we literally made on the floor in order to solve a problem. And should they physically stand on the same piece of paper, it meant that there was going to be a pinch point in the process. So one behavior that you can adopt is, well, let's behave like the problem, or behave like the consumer, or behave, rather than get things out of your head, be a bit more physical with it. I'm a fan of incubating thinking much more than brainstorms. So this is a picture of my daughter years ago when we were flying, I think it was flying to Dubai actually, and she was in the world of her own, sitting on the end of the row of chairs there. She was listening to some music, staring down at the world below, and it was just a lovely moment when she was in her own head. And I spotted my wife had taken the same opportunity to just catch up on sleep. So children look at the world with their eyes in wonder and hope, whereas adults seem to sort of shut things down quite quickly. So it's the same when it comes to brainstorms. Don't do them in the office. And actually, I don't think you should do them at all, because they never, ever really generate good ideas. It's much better that you ask your staff to incubate thinking over a period of time. So there's a very complementary energy between my daughter there thinking over a period of time, and one of my clients there, Andy, sitting on a deserted office one afternoon, just gently making some notes. And that quality of time is a behavioral. Okay. In the world of meetings, Zoom call, I think we've lost the art of just incubating an idea for a long period of time. So I advocate that. Re-expressing with images. A picture paints 1,000 words. So we'll always be using metaphors and stories. And as you can see, I'm filling this presentation with photos and images for you. You'll cut through such a lot if you get hung up on words all the time. If you just draw your issues, you can bring to life your insights and your customers a lot better if you have images. When you can see the ideas and you can see the points of view that your staff have, it's easier for the high ups to make decisions as well. You can capture the culture and the mood and the storytelling narratives around a business if you have big murals that can act as a reminder of what to do and how to be when it comes to innovation. And when it comes to vision and strategy, again, we make huge canvases on which people can get involved, so you can start to see people's thinking that are coming in different ways. So this is for Just Giving, which is a big charity over in the UK. Here is HSBC, Nigel there. He's comparing what he wanted from a vision on the left to what he was actually getting on the right. So again, visuals are just a lovely way for the big topics to be nerdled. and making things physical and visual. This is a behavior. It's getting into the habit of doing this as a behavior. You can start to do your agile planning and your backlogs. I know we're all sick to death of that, but again, that process needs to be facilitated. So if things look a little, get stuck, then informally drawn ideas, thoughts, and tactics work a lot better. Which comes to my final point, is making things, there's this sort of issue in business, things have to be perfect and laminated and typed up, and that's not necessarily the case. So this is Dave over in the USA. He's got quite a chunky brief to work on, but again, it's down to that sort of 1 point challenge. If we just hand scamp out the idea and show it to people, it invites commentary rather than typing it up. Subconsciously, people behave around things that are typed as if they're finished and complete, and there's no opportunity to make them better. And similar again there, that's for the ideas to make the Burj Al Arab a little bit more interactive. Again, if things aren't typed up but they're just stamped, you're inviting the behavior of growing an idea rather than judging it. And again, similarly, if you invite, if you capture your customer insights as sort of sketches and stamps rather than big lengthy reports, you invite the behavior of building and nurturing new thinking. Okay. So, oh, and there we're at the end. Hooray! Right. So that was almost everything about innovation in like a 30-minute. I feel like the equivalent of, is it Neo in the Matrix, Sarah, where they inject Kung Fu into the back of his head? There you go. So I've just gone, boom. But that's it. If the fire alarm goes now, or I get cut off in the internet, invest in attitude, skills, leadership, change your environment, and people's behavior, and I absolutely promise you, you'll start to innovate a lot stronger than you did before.
Fab. Thank you very much, Andy. Cool. Look, let's start the chat. Like, Damien, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I'll get in early. That was a fascinating presentation. I really enjoyed it. My question is related to, because so much of your pictures are related around the environment. And I mean, that just sets the scene for everything that you can do with a team. You might see where I'm heading with this. We work in a distributed organization. So we've got an office where there's people, then we've got people that will be working at home and in different countries and everything like this. So I would love to foster this type of innovative attitude, but want to take in consideration that kind of more challenging setup. Do you have any advice about how you can manage a distributed team to also still promote these ideas, and any tools or best practices, and how we might be able to do it either synchronously or asynchronously as well?
Right, okay. A sort of swamp of questions there, Damien. Ultimately, I think your people, they might be in a global team. Many people on this call might be facing into global teams, and you might be separated by space and time. But a lot of people at the moment are still working alone, aren't they? And they might have be in their desk in their favorite chair at home, or they might have be in the office. They might have secured a particular environment. My advice is get into the habit of changing that environment. Okay. Sometimes it is important that you get everybody together and you go to the office, and it's just a necessary evil. It's not the most inspiring office, but the reason we're there is to do the quarterly update, share the figures and hear the strategy, and then go home. I get that. But in the rhythm of people's working life, remind them that they don't have to be sitting in front of their laptop all day, getting hunched over the kitchen table or stuck in the office. It's amazing how we get into habits subconsciously and we don't notice that that's the case. All right. And I bet everybody right now is in the same chair that they were yesterday. Okay. So you just got to remind people, constantly mix it up, because we've all been speaking informally about the benefits of getting away from the desk and going for a walk and getting some fresh air. The same applies to the connections you make when it comes to customer insights or scoping a brief or having ideas. Just keep changing it up. Okay, that I think is ultimately my my mantle. Yeah.
So would you say then, Andy, that doing something like, so if you want to try and have an innovation session as part of your team meeting, and as Damien said, you know, you've got a disparate team all over the world, just say to them, right, for this team meeting, go and sit somewhere else, you know, go to the coffee shop to have the call, go to, you know, sit at another desk, go and sit at another part of the office, or and just doing something as simple as that. Do you think that can sort of like
Yeah, it can help.
that?
I wouldn't put an innovation session in the team meeting, because the chances are you'll want to solve the world's biggest challenge in your business in the 7 minutes left of your weekly stand-up. But when it comes to separating that particular challenge, you can send a signal to the rest of the business and your team that things are different by encouraging them to go somewhere else to think about it first, so that when you do meet, you've had some quality thinking. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and that kind of then feeds into that whole incubator type thing you were
Exactly.
talking about. So
Yeah.
send out the brief, go think about it, then let's come back and let's do that.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, incubate that thinking somewhere else, definitely.
Yeah. Stephen, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Andy, we spoke earlier today, and the subject is the return to the workplace. We were thrown into a chaotic world a year ago, and a lot of organizations are still reeling at the prospect of how do we get back to some degree of normality. Well, look, change has happened without even working through your 5 great ideas. But here we're faced with one real prospect, which is that in the UK on the 21st of June, I think the government are legislating that we are now allowed to return to some form of normality because social distancing will be abandoned. How do we change from where we have come into lockdown into some free world? Does your method work?
It could do, Steve, and yeah, we spoke earlier about other things. So I'm not going to get distracted by the current focus of we need to work from home, we're going to work from office. I think that's quite short term. But the principles here are to help organizations get fitter and healthier around building innovation capability in the long term. And we weren't set up that well before the pandemic, were we? Because if we were, then there wouldn't be the thousands of agencies and consultancies and coaches and gurus out there helping big businesses transform. I think what will happen is when, for me, the pandemic just accelerated that work.
Oh no, he's gone again. All right. Okay. So yeah, he jinxed it. Absolutely, Marita. Okay.
I'm back.
You're back.
Yeah, and that's all I have to say about it. So look, I think is don't get distracted right now about this whole work from home thing. I just think that's everybody's facing that. Get that out of the way. Businesses that are investing well in these principles, they're not ours. We're just putting language to what we've seen in businesses that have been operating well, and they have invested in people's attitude. They have spent money on skilling their people up to do things slightly differently. They have developed their leaders so that they can be a bit more flexible and work with a bit more ambiguity. And they've invested carefully about what environments people can work in. That one, I think, is now taking care of itself, the environment piece. I think the next challenge that L&D has is being able to skill their leaders up in a way that they can deal with people who are working differently rather than the original paradigms from back in the day. I guess that they were largely inherited from the industrial revolutions, perhaps, but that's one for a glass of red wine and a longer conversation. Hope that helps, Steve.
I have one other question, if I may. I think L&D have a really, really important part to play in one of the greatest conundrums that most general managers in industry, and I specialize as a recruiter in the FMCG industry, Most general managers and HRDs are preoccupied every day with how do we get the workforce back when there is so much controversy over the idea of returning to the office. It is very much an L&D matter of priority rather than getting an MD or a leader to work out the answer, don't you think?
Yes, I had to think about that one. I'm trying to work out when your statement became a question, but ultimately,
well, we're relying on the CEOs and the leaders to come up with the answer.
Oh, yeah.
Rather than and dare I say, if you ask the workforce, you'll get completely different opinions. We're into a world of personalization, which is causing all sorts of chaos now, because some do and some don't, and some do want a little bit and some want lots. You'll never get the universal answer. But my shout out to the world of L&D is, this is a great place for L&D to really come to life.
Oh, yeah. L&D can set the conditions for this to happen. Most definitely. And I also think there's an opportunity, because everyone on the call, I think we've all been given the same storm, right? We've all been issued a pandemic, so we're all experts on this. We're all being, everybody's points of view are valid. Out of this huge bit of inertia, the people that win are going to be the people that experiment, the people that are going to trial small projects, invest in their people just a little bit, rather than waiting, as I sometimes see L&D do, waiting for someone else to do what it becomes the established best practice and then copy and paste. Okay, so I'm a huge fan of experiments. Experiment and learn, experiment and learn. Okay.
And that's interesting, because that is something that we've talked about in our previous sessions, is just that ability to adapt to change, and obviously L&D being such a key part of that. If we can support our people to kind of constantly be evolving, be constantly learning, then we're much better in terms of being able to kind of move the organization forward. So that's certainly going to be a key part. I would love to get some insights from the rest of the group. Is anyone doing stuff on innovation at the moment, and what sort of examples can you share with us about what you're doing within organizations around innovation? Anyone like to share with us what they're doing?
Sarah, can I just comment on something that Stephen just mentioned, just as a follow-up? So my name is Kat. I don't know many of you, but I work for Marriott International as head of comms and change management. And we're obviously in hospitality and trying to bring people back to the workplace and get people comfortable to come back, and also win people back to an industry that's been really hugely impacted and people don't really trust at the moment. Because, I mean, who would want to work in a hotel right now when they've been shut for so many months, So L&D and HR have formed talent network teams. It's a global kind of initiative, but they've done it in each continent. So I'm part of Europe, Middle East and Africa. And we've got 2 months as a small kind of cross-departmental team to come up with a series of recommendations of how to make Marriott, Marriott is an employer of choice anyway, but how to kind of, I don't know, reaffirm that, I guess, and win people back to hospitality. And so we are just, we're doing a bunch of research, looking at what the companies are doing. We don't know each other. There's a team of about 10 of us working together. We've got a project manager and a kind of supporter, and 60 days to come up with some, hopefully, pressures on, good recommendations on what they can do, which will go back to global and feed through back to the kind of part of the wider initiative. So just to comment on what you were just saying, that's something we're doing, and everyone's super excited about it, and we've got a kind of defined portion of time, and some of the principles that Annie's kind of introduced today we're using anyway, which is great. So
I like your story, Kat, in that part of your story was there's lots of excitement. Boom. So attitudinal mindset is that we expect you, HR and L&D, to come together, and we're imbuing you with the agency to come up with some ideas. So that's number one. With that, I've inferred that the leaders would therefore be on board. Yeah. I'm hoping that behind the scenes, the skills element is that it isn't just some awful idea suggestion box, and behind that is some even worse, Dragon's Den, where all your ideas that you spent 60 days nurturing are poo-pooed by the high-ups. And I know that that's not the case, but that would be where you could get some real traction to build on people's collective hard work. And you would be moving around, because I know that you're working at home, but the chances are you can move around Dubai a little bit more freer than we can in the UK to meet up and try some ideas out. But I know that you could probably get into the behaviour of some small experiments with your staff, and even the guests could get involved, because they're probably going to be a better source of inspiration on what to do to please them than the staff in the Marriott organisation trying to second guess what these guys want. So I've inferred that all of those elements there, to a lesser or greater extent, are being employed. So that's a good example.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks for sharing that, Kat. Thank you. What about anybody else? Anyone else doing anything in the innovation sphere? What are you doing? Any examples that you've heard of? I'd love to hear.
Sarah, mine's not really an example. It's more a question to Andy, just around one of the big hot topics, which I would imagine is across all organizations, is the whole principles around design thinking. And when you were talking about 5 principles of the hand, Andy, I just wonder how that relates to that whole, are they interconnected, the whole design thinking process? Because we, a lot of what we approach now in the bank here is along those principles of, what does the customer want, etc., and the idea stage and all of that. How do the two link? And do you,
I think they do link. On a separate rant, sort of design thinking isn't new, and I'm looking around because somewhere close to me, I've got a book from 1989, and it's a school design textbook, and it describes design thinking with the number one, identify a real human need. But if we were teaching that in 1988, it's not new. Yeah. So beware the emperor's new clothes, Paul. That's it. The design thinking is a process, so there's a series of steps. I think they can be lubricated by these elements, and in all truth, there's one that these are all behaviors. Yeah. So a crude analogy would be, if your design thinking is a process and that's the engine, then to stop how
He's paused again. So you'll get half a question answered there, Paul.
For a moment.
Yeah, exactly. I know I've certainly done some innovation sessions around the kind of design thinking principles, and I think there's some really fantastic methodology that you can use to really create that innovative way of working. And I think there's a lot of tools and techniques, but again, one of the big things that that a lot of those design thinking kind of ideas are coming from, it's how you facilitate it, and that's what Andy said as well. It's everyone can do a brainstorming session, but actually few people can actually do it right. And that's been an interesting kind of part of it. But there's so many great kind of techniques that we can pull from design thinking to kind of evolve that. And I know I've certainly used a couple before to do stuff, which is fun to do.
Yeah. It makes me smile when Andy says it's a kind of 1989 thing, and we now have it kind of under future skills. So it just makes me smile.
Yeah, well, none of these things, they're always kind of wrapped up, aren't they, in a slightly different terminology, which is always quite amusing. And yeah, so it's grand. All right, what other questions do we have, or comments? I'd love to hear some feedback, what people are doing. It'd be great to hear from you.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Welcome back, Andy.
What is going on here? Right. So your process. Sorry, Paul. It could be anybody's process. There'll be succession planning here. There'll be capability building in terms of I don't know, the graduates that you're involved in. It could be that you've got leadership development programs, or whatever processes you guys face into. That sequence of events can be made all the more better and enhanced all the more stronger at a behavioral level by the quality of people who facilitate it. So all of these are essentially the lubricating behaviours to that process engine. All right. And I think my belief and the stuff that I've stolen from where I've seen great things happen in business, it's not the what people do or what the process that they follow or the flavour of the month, but it's the quality of the conviction and how they show up and facilitate it. So
Andy, I'm going to ask a question, if I may. What do you do when you're faced with someone who sits there with, innovation session, you've got the team, they're all energized, and they're sitting there, arms folded, face on them, like a rainy day? How do you deal with that and the kind of the naysayers when you're trying to kind of facilitate some of those innovation sessions?
Yeah, well, with any luck, they shouldn't be like that to start with, because they should know why they've been invited and they've had a pre-pack and the brief is new. A lot of this is disengagement because people are thrown into these situations that are alien to them. So that's some of the challenge. Again, the second one is I don't read into it too much because I have no responsibility to other people, the way they think and feel. Some people's thinking faces are just very hard to read. But it's often the way that I ignore it. We get going into the sessions that last for days and weeks and months, our projects, rather than an intense half hour to save the world like Armageddon. And it's about breaking the rhythm of the sessions up so that they are involved rather than being spoken at. Okay, and a quiet word with a cup of coffee often finds out what's disengaging someone. It's usually something at work that they're preoccupied with. It's a bit of empathy as best I can. I don't get it right all the time, but greater tide of common sense. Right, it's 1 minute to go, Sarah. Let's be good and aim to good leadership and end on time, shall we?
Absolutely. Okay, well, listen, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. I hope you find that insightful, it was exciting, and certainly what we'll do is we'll go away and we will deliver you a little one-pager fantastic note all about some of those key principles that you'll be able to take away with you. Great to see everybody again. Hope everybody is well. Thank you for those people joining us wherever you are. And a massive thank you to you, Andy, for joining us for this session on and off in between those technical hitches. But fantastic that for the majority of the time we got.
A majority of the time. Thank you anyway. Good questions, everyone. And I'll go and type up a one-pager. Okay.
Fantastic. Love it. All right, everybody. We'll stay on. Any issues, give us a shout. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day. Thank you all so much. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Sarah.